14th meeting of the MCE Energy Board of Directors. Any board announcements? Seeing none. Any public open time for items not on our agenda? Seeing none. Dawn, you're on. Report from Chief Executive Officer.
Great, thanks. So just a couple of items this evening. I wanted to let folks know that the Earth Day event at the MCE headquarters on Earth Day here was a big success, and I just wanted to thank staff and board members who participated in making it happen. So it was definitely well attended, and a lot of folks rotated through here throughout the day. I also wanted to let folks know, for those of you that couldn't participate, we held a ribbon cutting of our second local solar energy project that was held at the Buck Institute on May 12th, just last week. And this is a really exciting project. You all probably saw some of the press about this project, but it's a 1 megawatt carport shade structure that has been in the works since late 2011. So this is really this is the second power supply contract that we ever entered into, and finally to see it completed and now delivering energy is really exciting. Great images are available on our website, and we also have a great video that shows some time-lapse images of the project being built. Next item is I wanted to make sure folks were aware that the College of Marin battery that we've been talking about off and on for the last 6 months is now very close to completion, and we expect to have a launch and ribbon cutting ceremony in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. There was some recent press in the Marin Independent Journal and in the East Bay Times and a couple of technology-based media outlets about this battery installation, and we're real excited about it. We helped to get this project off the ground by holding a workshop 3 years ago where we brought Tesla together with a bunch of potential customers, and College of Marin was the one that moved forward first. So we're excited about that one getting wrapped up. And then I wanted to report on some activities since our last meeting. We have 3 ad hoc committee meetings that were held last week: the rate setting committee, the contracts committee, and the ad hoc audit committee. I wanted to thank all of the board members that participated in those meetings. I think we got a lot done in each of those committees, and all of the contributions from our board members is really greatly appreciated. We know it takes time, and I just want to acknowledge your helpful input there. And I believe Director McCaskill might have some additional comments about the audit committee under board member comments. The next item I want to report on is that the CPUC voted on May 12th to increase MCE's energy efficiency funding by 30%, which is $360,000 a year, going from $1.2 million a year to $1.5 million a year. And this is due to the increase in our service area. And I think what it shows is that a lot of the legwork that we've done in the last few years to establish our energy efficiency program has now kind of gotten us in the door, so to speak, so that when we are adding to our service area, it's a relatively simple process to go through and add to the amount of revenue that we're receiving to implement our energy efficiency programs in those new communities. So it sets a great precedent. We're really excited to see that action take place. And then the last item I wanted to report on is related to San Pablo, and wanted to let folks know that the Cool California Challenge that many of you all participated in resulted in an award going to San Pablo, and they have chosen to purchase Deep Green Energy with their award money, and that'll be taking effect in July of this year. So really excited about that, and these funds will allow the city to purchase 100% renewable electricity for the next year. So that's it for my report.
Are you going to talk about that potential agenda item they have now or later?
This would be a great time to do that. And so, yeah, we have the need for an urgency item to be added to the agenda tonight. And I'll explain what it refers to, and then I'll leave it to our board members to make the motion to add this. We can add it to the end of the agenda. But as you all are aware, we've been working on an exciting project to get a solar project built in Richmond, the MCE Solar One project. the developer that's been working with us has been unable to meet many of the milestones in the contract, and as many of you know, we've needed to terminate that contract. We're in the process of vetting and identifying the right developer to step into that role and complete the work of getting that project developed, and to maintain ownership until the project is completed and the tax credits have been expended. But in the interim, while we're vetting developers, there are some items that need to be paid for before the project is transferred over to the new developer. So the urgency item is related to some needs that we were just made aware of recently since our last board meeting, and need to be addressed before our next board meeting in June. So that's the reason for the urgency tonight.
I have a motion for the urgency. Somebody gonna move? We need to have a motion.
I would like to move that we add this to the agenda for tonight as an urgency item.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposition? Abstentions? Great, thank you. Anything else, Tom?
No, that's all I have.
Alrighty. So, next item on our agenda is our consent calendar. It has two items, the minutes from our April 21st meeting and also approved contracts update. Any comments or questions or revisions or anything on either of the items on consent?
I'll move the consent calendar.
No, I will. What, on the executive director's report?
No.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. And Ford is reminding me that I want to ask the public if anyone wants to comment. on the consent
Unnecessarily.
calendar. It's really an unnecessary
Unnecessarily.
reminder. I thought he usually sat one more seat.
I'm close to you now.
All right, seeing no public, and we have a motion, do we have a second?
Yes,
All
second.
right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition to approving consent? No, any abstentions?
I have to abstain from the minutes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I do too.
All right then, thank you. All right, on to item 5 on our agenda, which is procurement authorization for service to new communities.
Great, so I can introduce this item, and then John DeLussy is also here to chime in and answer questions. As you all remember, last month your board approved the addition of 7 new communities to the MCE service area. And we are involved in some of the early stages of doing outreach in those communities. We've also, as directed by your board, we have submitted the implementation plan amendment to the California Public Utilities Commission, and since that was submitted, it's actually already been certified by the CPUC. So with that certification now complete, we are able to begin doing our enrollment activities and sending enrollment notices. One of the other activities that is very important for us to undertake prior to service in September is procurement. And so the item before you right now is authorization to undertake procurement to serve the new load. And there's a lot of detail here in the staff report regarding the number of accounts, the projected annual energy needs, and after we have completed the procurement, we will be able to come back to the board with kind of final results of what the costs will be for that power supply, and that will be a part of the final budget approval that will be available for board approval in June. And that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Anything else? That was it, straightforward. Kirby isn't going to tell us in great detail about this item. John, Kirby, no. Kirby's this one. Any questions from the board on this item?
I'll make a motion.
Great. I need to ask the public, or Ford is going to remind me. Does anyone from the public like to comment on this item? Seeing none. All right, I have a motion.
And a second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? All right, that was easy. Next item on our agenda is preliminary proposed rate adjustment for fiscal year 2016-17. Dawn?
Great, and we actually have a slide deck that we're going to pull up for this one, and we're going to hear from John DeLussy on this.
Okay. You did get to hear me rather well.
Oh, good, thank you. All right.
I'm really inept with these mics for some reason. All right, help.
Wait for a moment. Fix this. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, usually it seems like we just talked about rates because we did, right? We set rates in back in I guess it was March for the fiscal year that started with April 1st. So what we're recommending here is a little different, and this relates to the expansion of the program and the plan to extend service to the 7 new communities starting in September of this year. So yeah, if we could go to the first slide here. If you recall, I think it was just last month, we conducted the quantitative analysis associated with the new communities and what would it mean bringing those communities into the program, a number of different perspectives, one of them being what would be the potential rate benefit for MCE. And what we found is we estimated that bringing those customers in and the increased sales could result in about an 8% rate benefit to existing customers and to the new customers as well, for that matter. And typically MCE adjusts its rates once a year, and so the next part of that cycle would be next April. But we're recommending that in this case that MCE reduce its rates and adjust its rates effective September 1st, so that the rates would be lower for all customers at the time that these new customers are enrolled. That's the kind of the 30,000-foot summary. This was discussed, in fact, the proposal that I'm going to go over today, as well as a number of alternative rate proposals, was discussed both at the executive committee as well as the ad hoc rates committee. And we looked at a number of different proposals, including making no change to rates until next April, as well as reducing rates to a level that would allow MCE to meet its targeted revenue surplus contribution, its reserve contribution for the year. So when we set rates for the current fiscal year a couple months back, we had determined that the rates would yield about a 4% reserve contribution for the year. So one of the alternatives that we looked at was, well, let's maintain that 4% reserve contribution for the year. What would be the rate reduction to achieve that? And then a third option that we looked at was if we reduced even more and got to a point where even with the higher PCIA that went into effect in January, that we were pushed MCE rates down to achieve essentially cost parity for all customers. We looked at that option, we discussed it. And the various kind of considerations that were discussed in these committees were, where do we stand relative to PG&E in terms of rate competitiveness, and then consideration of MCE's progress towards meeting its reserve targets. So MCE has a reserve policy that identifies a desire to grow reserves annually to achieve a certain balance. So that was one of the key considerations, is making progress towards that target. We had input from the communications team, and there was a lot of discussion about customer relations and communications to the new communities, and also impact generally to MCE's credit standing. And there's a process underway. We're always, as we're buying power, we're always being evaluated in regards to our credit worthiness. And there's also an effort underway to start looking at getting a credit rating, which also involves a pretty rigorous review of our credit. So that was also considered in coming up with this recommendation. And so the general consensus emerged to adjust rates downward, but to a level that would still allow us to hit our 4% contribution to reserve target. So we can go on to the next one here. So the proposal, what that translates into is about, in aggregate, 7.5% rate reduction. That would bring the cost for the light green service to within 1% of PG&E's rates. And that would, individual customer impacts can vary, but on average, that would bring MCE's cost to within 1% of PG&E. And since the proposal here is to set rates to achieve a certain reserve target, we have a preliminary budget that includes what we think the procurement, the power costs will be that we need to buy for the new load. We're in the process right now of actually executing those contracts. You just provided authority to do that in the last agenda item. So once those contracts are finalized, we'll bring back in June an adjusted budget that reflects those contracts. And we may revise this rate proposal somewhat. So right now our best estimate is that it would be a 7.5% rate reduction. Could change next month, but we don't expect a significant change to that. And then in terms of, I said an average reduction of 7.5%, so that's in aggregate. That wouldn't be the case across the board. So the discussion here was to take this opportunity to direct those reductions to those rates that are furthest away from PG&E. And so right now, the residential rate is the furthest away from the corresponding PG&E rate. So they would get a larger rate reduction through this proposal. And you can see how this plays out across the various categories, the various rate categories. So some of the customer groups would see no change at all. So for instance, the small commercial group A6 is already pretty close to PG&E, so there would be no change in their rate under this proposal. Whereas the residential and the agricultural rates are a bit further away from PG&E, so they would get the larger rate reduction. So the objective here is really to realign to a large part our current rate structure to better match PG&E, the PG&E alternative, and make sure that all of our customers are pretty close. So that's the basic idea. If we go to the next slide, you'll see how that plays out. I said that we'd be within less than 1%. It's actually about 0.6% of PG&E. And again, this is inclusive of the payment of the PCIA and all the other surcharges. So you can see we'd be pretty close across the board, and that's the result of the revenue allocation in the previous slide being directed to those classes that are furthest, kind of paying the most. So the fiscal impact, so this is relative to no rate change at all. So the current fiscal year, by making this rate reduction in September, we would see a reduction of about $10 million for the current fiscal year. And since that's just a partial year, we've also looked at this on a full year basis, and it would result in a reduction in revenues of about $18 million. Now again, that's a reduction in revenues relative to if we kept rates at the current level. Our revenues are actually going to go up because we have the new communities in and higher sales. Reserves will also increase relative to the budget that has been previously adopted, so I just want to make that clear. Then I think we have that item, I think, coming up next, in fact, the budget adjustment. So the recommendation is to accept our proposal to reduce MCE rates effective September 1st, 2016, and to achieve a targeted contribution to reserves for the current fiscal year of 4% of revenues. And we would present final rates at the next board meeting once we've locked in our power supply contracts and we're able to bring you a final budget adjustment for the fiscal year. Any questions?
Oh, great. Any questions, Barbara? Yes.
Barbara Kohler, Fairfax. So I have two questions. We have an unusual start of our fiscal year. When is that?
April 1st.
Okay, yeah, because I know at one point it said something about being able to make up the difference as the new communities come on. And we did experience last year a little bit of a honeymoon phase where residential customers were a little bit less than PG&E rates before the PCIA increased. And so for residential, 0.6%, so is that a few dollars difference more than PG&E? Is that what, maybe when
Yeah.
you bring it in June, you give some sort of samples of what it looks like for a customer?
Right, yeah, we can do that. It's less than that, though, in terms of impact. I think it may be like 50 or 60 cents per month for an average
Well, that's great.
consuming
I just
residential customer.
I wasn't able to calculate.
Right, no, understood. And so, yeah, I think we can bring that information to the next meeting and give you, examples of how the monthly cost would compare. But it's de minimis. I think a typical residential customer uses roughly 500 kilowatt hours a month, and their bill might be $100 a month, and 0.6% of that is 60 cents. So it's really a small difference.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
John, thank you for that presentation. I just wanted to clarify, I think I understand, but I just wanted to make sure that in this proposal, as the revenues are going up, that the planned 4% for reserve allocation is 4% of the increased revenues. Is that correct?
Yes,
Thanks.
that's correct.
Good clarification. Any, Andrew?
Yeah, John, question. Your commentary about wanting to favor those ratepayers or ratepayer groups that are kind of furthest from PG&E, is that just kind of philosophically, you're seeking greater parity among our rate-paying groups relative to PG&E, or is it because, in this case, residential are more price sensitive? So the closer you get to PG&E, the least likely we are to lose them as a group.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and that was a topic of the discussions, particularly at the ad hoc rates committee. And there was a feeling. I think you can argue kind of both sides of that. I think an argument can be made that the commercial customers are really more price sensitive because energy can be such a large piece of their operational costs. But there was a perspective brought, I think, by the communications team that it's really the residential customers that are kind of most vocal and kind of paying attention to rates during the enrollment period, during this initial offering period. And so there was so I don't think there's a clear-cut answer there. I think you could kind of lean both ways, but it seemed to be expressed that when it comes to setting first impressions about the program, kind of the image of the program, that is really the residential sector that was more influential in those types of considerations, and that argued for having rates for that customer group to be as close as to PG&E as for the commercial customers and the other customers.
So John, I wonder if we could go back to an earlier slide that does show the different proposed rate reductions for the different categories. And I'm wondering if that slide is going to also help us understand what percentage of our customers are residential.
Yeah, it should. It should in terms of energy sales or revenues. So this is actually, this slide is good. It's not the one you're talking about, but this does show our revenues. On a full year basis at the new rates, we would expect to collect about $220 million. And you can see that 94 million of that is from the residential sector. And then if you go to the next slide, this is a little bit different because here we've included our charges as well as PG&E's charges. So that would include the PCIA, but also costs for delivery service. So this is a look at kind of the bottom line electric cost to the consumer, all in. So I think one thing that kind of you can draw from this is that PG&E's charges are actually higher than ours, even for our customers. So the delivery side of the bill is actually higher than the generation side of the bill. But this is, I think, a better representation of kind of customer cost impacts. They're really more concerned about the bottom line, not so much how we compare generation to generation.
Right, and that's what I was going for, and I think, if you look at it just in sheer numbers, then more of our accounts are residential accounts, and so, from my perspective, by focusing more of the rate reduction in the residential category, we're creating a benefit for a larger proportion of our customers, which is a good thing, in addition to, hopefully I'm right on this.
The vast majority,
It's the vast
80+%
majority
are
of our customers, right?
going to be
So it's
residential,
an
yeah.
appropriate focus, as well as offsetting more of the PCIA, which is a whole different conversation of sort of all the complications that the PCA, the incredible increase in the PCA charges in January created for us. I think it's the right thing to do, personally, to try to offset as a larger proportion of that PCA. But if you look at the impact on revenues that we would we are taking as a result of this, that's because, in part, from my perspective, of the increase in the PCIA.
That's a great point. The PCIA disproportionately impacts residential customers. It's a charge on it's a cents per kilowatt hour, but it's much higher for residential customers than it is for commercial customers. So that 100% roughly increase that hit in January, that really did impact the residential customers disproportionately, and I think what we're able to do with this ability to reduce rates is to offset that kind of commensurately. Yeah.
So, continuing on with what you're talking about, Ford Green from San Anselmo, from the long view, what our strategy is to keep our largest customer base happier in order to, and we achieve that by getting as close to PG&E's rates as we can, having to absorb the PCIA increase along the way, with the idea that even if it does cost us, if that reduction in rates costs us $18 million in a year, from a long-range viability strategy, that's what would be in the best interest of MCE in general. Is that a fair recapitulation of some of the background reasoning of how you came to this?
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. Of course, a key objective of MCE is to have competitive rates.
Right.
We have environmental objectives, obviously, but
Right.
Competitive rates is a key. And so I think the thinking here is that effectively, if we didn't lower rates, we would be generating much more surplus than we ever anticipated, right? In terms of the budgeting process, that 4% would be significantly higher. So this is an opportunity to really become more competitive on the rates. Hopefully that does reduce in greater participation in the new communities and just keep the customer base more loyal generally. So.
Well, and also, if we didn't do that, the likelihood of being unnecessarily fat would tend to increase the opt-out rates for the new communities too. I mean, I would think that would also be part of what the overall mix and consideration of what our approach is. Because I like it that instead of kind of getting unnecessarily fat and ponderous, that we're cutting and giving it back to our customers and giving it back to our community and maintaining what I've observed all the way along, which is even though we're a public agency, we're pretty nimble, and this seems to reflect that.
Alan?
Thank you, Alan Benicia. Two things. First of all, how often do we see taxes, fees, or anything go down? It's not a very common situation, so from a policy perspective, I think it's a wonderful thing, not only for marketing purposes, but for the actual ratepayers themselves. And I think it goes to say how genuine MCE is, and we have our goals and objectives and everything else, but to the extent that we can get along just fine and lower your rates too, hey, that's a wonderful thing. The other side of it, and this may actually make this even better, I'm thinking that I heard something about either PG&E going for another rate increase or having another rate increase approved. And so maybe someone can confirm for me, I don't remember the details. If that's the case and it's coming into being in the next numbers of months, it just makes it all even better.
Okay. Yeah.
So any comments from members of our ad hoc rate setting committee on conversations? No? Come on, Swan.
All right. I was part of the committee, and let me give my compliments to John Kirby in particular, and Don as usual. The staff's excellent report was great. We had a spirited discussion. What do we do about this thing? A primary, I would say, a controlling reason was to maintain reserves at 4% for a variety of reasons, just for safety going forward, and to try to balance out the cuts in such a way that it provides a competitive advantage to, or rather, minimize the competitive disadvantage of the unavoidable fact that our rates are now incrementally higher than PG&E, but by such a sliver of a fraction, it's like $20 a year or something. It's an absurdly low amount that it allows consistency with our mission statement. One of which is to reduce, greenhouse gases. That's not really an issue here, but one of which is to have competitive rates. And there wasn't a way that we could see to do it to make our rates actually less than PG&E. But if there's an aggregate difference for a basic homeowner that's like $20 a year, that's competitive. And we're also, doing our part to try to reduce greenhouse gases and also to encourage a, secure energy component to our citizens. So that was how we came down. We looked at the mission statement, and this was the compromise to which we reached.
Thank you. Any comments from the board or questions? Any comments from the public? None. So would someone like to move?
Yes, I'll move the staff report, and that would be the recommendation for the budget adjustment, September 1st. And to achieve the,
I think sounds fine.
Maybe you mean the rate adjustment. It's a little confusing because 6 and 7 are so similar, but this one is the rate adjustment.
that's what I'm on.
Second.
Thought I was on 6.
Are you good?
Don't scare me, I'm
Yeah.
good.
All right, I got a motion, a second, all in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? That's approved. Thank you, everybody. A lot of conversation went into this, and I think the outcome is a good one. All right, on to the budget. Item 7, preliminary proposed budget adjustment for fiscal year 2016-17. David?
David's going to introduce this item, and just to avoid confusion, I wanted to explain that Beth is handing around a staff report and some material related to the urgency item that was added to the end of the agenda, just so you all have that nearby. But it doesn't relate to this item that David's about to discuss.
Hi. So good evening, everyone. David McNeil, Finance and Project Manager at MCE. I'm just going to do the presentation standing with the mouse here. So I'll walk you through the proposed budget amendment. Again, we're not asking for approval of the budget amendment this evening. This is just for your review and information. And then when we finalize some of the costs associated with the expansion and settle on the rates, we'll come back to you with a budget amendment at the June board meeting. So, what's the impact of the expansion on revenues and expenditures? As you can see, the increased revenues for this fiscal year, which ends March 31st of 2017, is $38 million. So that represents basically a half year's worth of impact of these new communities. So you can kind of multiply by 2 to get a full year impact effect. Rolling down, these are estimated increases in cost of energy associated with providing that service. and an increase of net energy revenues of about 4 million. I won't go into detail, but please feel free to ask questions about the operating expenses. Some of them I'll just highlight. The data manager and the technical services are both, and the service fees from PG&E are all kind of tied to either rates or, to rates or customer accounts. So they're just sort of a function, more or less, of the increase in accounts or energy sales. Personnel expenses, those relate to new staffing positions in the procurement area, and in communications and in the legal team as well, again to support the growth of the organization. What else to highlight? All reasonably straightforward. Are there any questions about those increases?
Just one question.
Sure. Is that all?
It has to, we figured that out.
It's going to be red.
Yes, these are.
They should be green, but
Right.
we've agreed they're red now.
Yeah.
So, Barbara Fuller, Fairfax. So just a question, I know later on in the agenda, we have something about a new position.
Right.
Is that position considered in the personnel increase?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions about expenses? I'm going to bring it down a little bit further. So this is just picking up. Sorry, the page is sort of divided into. This is picking up the total increase in operating expenses here, the 2.5 million. Rolling down, we have an increase in interest income, and that's resulting from higher rates being paid by our bank, and also some increase in cash reserves compared to last year. And then the total contribution to the net position is going to increase from 5.8 million to 7.4 million. And that 7.4 represents about the 4% of revenues that John mentioned earlier. We also have capital outlay, and that's it for the proposed budget. Any questions?
I do have a question. It indicated in the staff report that some of the increases in costs are intended to support continued CCA cooperation. Would
Yeah.
those be the personnel costs, particularly, I'm assuming, legal, regulatory, and public affairs?
They're not personnel costs, but I'll let
Okay,
Dawn
all
speak
right.
to that one.
Great.
Yeah, those would primarily be contract costs. So we're engaging in a bit of legal activity to get documents drawn up, and then we may be engaging in some additional educational activities, but those would primarily fall under vendor services, special services.
Great, thank you. Questions? For the budget? We're
Great.
having an easy time of it tonight.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, and so really, I think all you're seeking here is some feedback on the proposed amendment, and then you will go back and finalize the budget amendment. Bring it
That's
back
right,
to us.
and we'll bring it back to you for, again, in June.
Okay, great, thank you. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion?
Is there an action on it?
There's not an action.
Well, it says action on it, but it's not really action, it's termed
It's
action.
optional action, but there's not a need for action.
Okay, so let's move on. Next on our agenda is the Executive Committee and Technical Committee overview and scope discussion. I'll lead that one.
Yeah, so I'll introduce this item, and I'm happy to answer questions along the way. As our service area has grown and our board has grown, we've had discussions typically at our annual retreats, sometimes at our individual committee meetings, about better defining what our standing committees are responsible for, and in some cases, allowing for some authority on items that has typically gone to the board in practice to be taken up at the committee level. And so we have spent a lot of time just tossing around this idea because there hasn't been any urgency to it. But at our recent meetings over the last few months of our standing committees, Executive Committee and Technical Committee, we've talked about kind of detailing out what those committees are responsible for, and what specifically what sorts of authorities they should have. So attached to the staff report here is a overview of scope for the executive committee and the technical committee. These were discussed in the May executive committee meeting and also in the April executive committee meeting, and have been refined with input from our standing committee members. We do not have similar documents for our ad hoc committees. The standing committees are temporary in nature, but we may decide to create some type of overview document that just describes the scope of those committees for informational purposes, and bring those to you at that time. But for now, we're here just to talk about the executive committee and technical committee overviews, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I think this was really helpful, especially for some of us who haven't been on the board for more than, I don't know how long, a year or two, I can't remember. But one thought I had was potentially it might, I think the way you've broken this out, the numbers and what the scope is really helpful, and also what kind of the mandatory, what the makeup could be. But I'm wondering if potentially there might be an option of adding terms potentially to each of the committees, because one of the things we talked about in the ad hoc inclusion committee, I think that was called, was, you know, as we grow, we may rely even more on these committees. So it might be potentially an opportunity to, at times, move people in and out so that you get new perspectives, new thoughts. And so that's just one thing I'm throwing out. I realize it's difficult since most of us are, or all of us are elected and our terms come up at different times. But it may be an option to consider that in the future, and maybe if the board likes that idea, maybe it's just something about adding terms potentially so that there could be opportunities for new people to come in and participate at that level.
Oh, interesting. And that's not something that came up when we were discussing this at the committee level, but maybe we can take that up as a future addition to these documents once they're approved.
Comments? Questions? Seeing none. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none.
I'll move adoption of this agenda item, the staff report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Any opposition? It's approved. All right, thank you, Don. So moving on to number 9 on our agenda, which is a resolution approving Amendment 11 to the Nuclear Energy Joint Powers Authority Agreement authorizing multi-jurisdiction board representation. This is a new step, so.
Yeah. So this also stemmed from discussions that we held in our board retreat last fall, and is tied to some of the new communities that we're serving, particularly in Napa County, where there's been an interest in potentially having one shared city representative that would sit on the board and represent the interests of all 5 cities and towns. In order to enable that, we needed to make an adjustment to the JPA agreement, and so what you have before you here is a resolution that would authorize multi-jurisdictional board representation, and this is done using the terminology of a designated party. So a city or town or even a county could elect to designate another elected official representative from another jurisdiction, as long as it's within the same county, to represent them on the board. And part of that representation would include the weighted vote that goes with the load in that community. So this has the amendment, the resolution kind of gives the overview, and then Amendment 11, which is also attached, gives you the actual language that would be added through this amendment to the JPA agreement.
So practically, Don, how will this work? When a new community comes on board, as part of coming on board, they will then indicate who their representative will be?
That's correct. And so the way it currently works is Darlene typically reaches out to the clerk in each of the new jurisdictions finds out which representative they want to assign, and it's really up to that jurisdiction to inform us of who they've put forward. In this case, the decision would likely be brought up for discussion at the regular meeting of city council members or mayors and city council members that happens actually in most communities and of course happens in Napa. So there would be discussion at that time. Frequently at those meetings, for those of you that might not have participated, they do tend to appoint members from within those meetings to serve on various JPAs, where in some cases there's just room for 1 or 2 city representatives. So this would be really the same exact type of discussion where here's a JPA, who wants to serve on it, who has an interest in this type of thing, and putting the name forward at that time. And then we would receive the name at that time. We would also be requiring not just a director, but also an alternate director, just as we do with any of the other cities and towns.
Seems like a good practical step with our various governance conversations of how we were going to manage and expanding the board.
Absolutely, and I think making it optional is a really nice starting point.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused. I thought the idea, if we have new communities coming on, each individual community, say there's 7 new, well, the Napa cities, would have an option to appoint somebody directly, or what's the process for them to decide jointly as to who they're going to have as a single member? It's not outlined in here. That's between them?
That is between them, yeah. So this just authorizes their designation of a party to represent them, but it's optional. So, you know, if one of the jurisdictions in Napa didn't want to participate and designate a party different from their own council, they would certainly be able to appoint someone from their own council to serve on our board. It's optional.
Comments, questions from the board? Yes. Brian?
Is there any retroactive applicability? So, for example, could El Cerrito appoint Richmond?
Well, this would, once the amendment is approved, it would be authorized for any members. So as an option, there would be no, you know, retroactive requirements or even going forward requirements. But it's certainly an option that any of our current members could take advantage of if they wanted to.
Yes. Barbara?
Well, my only question is really technical. It's about the resolution. So we voted the board voted last month to include the 7 new communities. And we don't have board members from those communities yet, or do we?
That's correct. They are in the process of being appointed. The City of Walnut Creek has appointed their board member and alternate, but unfortunately they were not available to be sworn in here tonight.
So should the resolution have all the new communities in it?
Excellent question. We did run that by our municipal council, and he said because they are formally members, they need to be listed, and because we have a quorum of the full board at this time, it's appropriate to approve the resolution.
That's great, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else from the board? Yes. Henry.
Just since it effectively is granting, it's like proxy status to the, whatever, the delegated board member, does it affect our quorum requirement at all?
Yes, it will affect the quorum requirement. So one representative, a designated party, does not count as more than one representative. So if Napa, all the cities in Napa, for example, were to choose one representative to serve, then our board would consist of 20 members, and therefore a quorum would be 11 or more.
I see.
Yikes, my sympathies to Darlene. Yeah. All right, anything else from the board? Anything else from the public? Seeing nothing else, this would sound like to move approval. John will speak at once.
I'll move.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposition? All right, that's approved. And on to item 10, which is approval of the second amendment to River City Bank credit agreement. David.
Okay, ooh, there it goes. David McNeil, Finance and Project Manager at MCE. So I am pleased to present an amendment to the agreement with River City Bank. It has several details, all of which are positive for MCE. We're increasing the limit from 15 to 20 million. We're changing it from a non-revolving agreement to a revolving agreement. We're reducing some of the fees. And in sum total, it's positive. The reason why we asked for an increase is to accommodate increased the credit requirements that are associated with increased energy procurement. So it's helpful. We can use it for standby letters of credit, or we can use it for short-term borrowing. We don't need to borrow short-term, but it's nice to have that available to us if needed. Any questions about the amendment, second amendment to the agreement?
Yes.
The 2.2 million, this, the debt service reserve,
Yes.
where does that show up in the budget that you presented earlier? What, is there a separate line item for it?
No, it's still effectively our cash. It just serves as collateral for the bank. So it's not an expenditure.
So it's not in the $31 million of assets, or it is?
It's in the $31 million of assets. That's correct. Yeah, we're just basically moving it from one MCE bank account to a different MCE bank account.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? This seems like a positive step forward in our
Yeah.
relationship with River City Bank.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Okay, seeing none. Somebody like to move approval?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposition? Approved. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
It's like the easiest night to have anything on the agenda.
Yeah, item 11, very controversial, so everybody get ready. No, this is actually very exciting. So we're here to talk to you this evening about the creation of a MCE Power Settlements Analyst. And I'm just noticing Katie's here, so she may want to chime in on this. I'll just say one thing, which is that this is signaling a transition of some functions that we have had conducted externally and bringing those in-house to have, because we now have a full-time need to take on some of these duties. So I'll turn it over to Katie if you want to.
Okay, sure. I'm actually presenting this on behalf of Greg Brem, who's up in, I believe, Humboldt County, making a presentation tomorrow. And as you know, with the addition of the 7 new communities, we have the responsibility to, of course, enter into more power contracts and provide power to a lot of additional customers. This position is in between an admin position and the power contracts manager position, and it's to relieve the higher level power contracts managers and Greg himself of some of the higher levels of negotiating and administrating power contracts and agreements, monitoring contract performance and dispute resolution and compliance oversight. So, any questions?
Barbara?
So I just have one question on the recommendation. It's talking about the salary. First of all, I think this is a great position, and we're very fortunate to move this direction. The salary range is from $65,000 to $109,000, and the exact compensation is determined by the chief executive officer. And that's a pretty big spread. It's like $44,000 difference. And do we normally do that kind of differential? Is it depending on the level of experience? Because that seems like that would be the top of the range potentially to start someone at.
We often do see that, sorry to jump in.
That's
and
okay.
add on, but we often do see that, particularly with our technical positions, because you can have folks coming in at a very junior level, just starting off their careers and getting started with us and kind of coming up the learning curve while they're with us. On the other hand, we can also get folks that are at a very senior level that have a lot of experience, and we wanted to allow for some flexibility with this particular position so that we can find someone who's the right fit and make sure that we can compensate them according to their years of experience. So that was that was the main rationale behind it, and we've seen that with other technical positions as well. Do you want to add anything?
Yes, when we did the compensation analysis last fall, on the top of each, top of the range for each job class, we added 15%. So we do have, all of our job classes have broad ranges so that we have the ability to hire in that range. So that this is consistent with the salary survey that we would normally do, and then we keep the bottom consistent with the market, and then we add 15% at the top, consistent with what your board approved in the fall.
So, let's assume somebody was hired at the top of that. What's the difference between that and the person above them? I mean, because do we have anywhere to go from there?
Ranges, but usually it's at the lower end of the range. I don't recall exactly what the power contracts manager one is, but there's actually several levels that this job could promote to. Power contracts manager 1 and 2, and they're both higher than this.
So, Donna, isn't the thrust of this job, it has a lot to do with monitoring the CAISO settlement process?
Yes, validating invoices is another big role, and as we enter into many more power supply agreements, the validation of invoices is taking up a lot more time from our procurement team. The CAISO invoice is one that's extremely complex, and we actually rely on the PEA team to oversee that process, and we wouldn't be looking to change that. But we would be looking to handle a lot of our other invoice validation, and also potentially providing some redundancy for the scheduling coordination role that will be engaging in market transactions.
So would the, excuse me, is the accuracy of being able to forecast CAISO scheduling that's really important, because that's where if we schedule it wrong, we can end up owing a lot of money. And so it seems to me like it's kind of like commodities trading that also involves hedging strategies, so you try to protect yourself going forward. So this position, the technical requirements and the market know-how, the level of sophistication is pretty high.
Well, no, this position actually
Or am I
would not.
misunderstanding the
Yeah,
scope of the position?
what you're probably thinking about is the schedule coordinator role that we are looking to contract out to a new vendor, and that's a scope of work that has been discussed recently in some of our committees and will be likely coming to the full board in the next month or so. You're right, that is a very complex and important function, and we would be working with an external team to do that with us and on our behalf. The settlements analyst is really to look at settlements, which is kind of tying out the costs and expenses, making sure that the kilowatt hours were delivered to us and transferred to us as they should have been, and that the dollar amount that we contracted for that particular power.
So it's invoice monitoring.
That's a very big part of the job,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
Bill checking.
Yeah.
Carla?
Carla Smalltown Ross. Just to piggyback on the question about salary, I know it was mentioned earlier that that's in the budget amendment, under personnel costs, but I'm just curious, do you take it at the full 109 in the budget amendment? Because you have it listed at like 887,000, I think, at 6%, so are you taking that at 109 in there?
Yeah, well, there's not a linear relationship between all of the staff salaries. and the number that we sum it up, and then we put in a little bit of a contingency. But the short answer to your question is, yeah, we would budget for the full amount, but then the hiring policy and practice is a completely separate matter. And they
Right,
don't
I just was
obviously
wondering,
target
if you budget for the high end.
the high end.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Don, a question not directly directed at this, but it strikes me that really everything on our agenda tonight, except for the overview of the executive committee and the technical committee, are items that relate to the expansion into the new communities. And I think that's something to celebrate, but I'm also curious, do we have how many more steps or issues do we need to address as a consequence of the expansion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in June, we will be taking final action on 2 items that came before you tonight, the rate setting and the budget setting. At that time, we will not have further actions that will be needed. We certainly may have incremental staff positions that we identify as we proceed through the enrollment, although that's not anticipated at this time. So I expect that by June we'll be done with taking care of what we need to be prepared for the enrollment.
Great, thank you.
And we do tend to take a break in July, by the way, so hopefully no board meeting in July.
We need to get everything done before July.
That's right.
All right. Okay, any other comments or questions on this item? Anything from the public? All right, seeing none, would someone like to move this item?
I will move it. Approve the position of Power Settlements Analyst per the description and salary range.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposition? That's approved. All right, and so next on our agenda is our urgency item, which is the proposed budget amendment on Renewable Energy Reserve Fund for fiscal year 2016-17.
Nice, I'll come around if there's more numbers on the screen. The background on this agenda item is in March of last year, we entered into an agreement with Scion, which is a solar developer, to develop the MCE Solar One project in Richmond. They failed basically to meet their contractual obligations, and as a result of that, MCE terminated the agreement with Scion. We're now in the process of negotiating an agreement with a new developer to take over the project. We're very optimistic about that process. We initially thought that we would be able to reach an agreement more quickly, and what's emerged more recently is it's become apparent that we're going to need more time to reach that agreement. So during that period in which we don't have a developer on site, we need to incur some expenditures in order to keep this project rolling. And so what we're coming to the board tonight to do is to obtain your approval to continue with that process. So can I propose a moment of silence, if it's needed, for people to read over the staff report and honor the dearly departed Scion Corporation? And I would suggest reading from the bottom up, the bottom up of the staff report, where we're asking for the
We can read one.
okay, well, it's up to you guys. It's up to you guys. You want me to go? Okay.
Read you were talking before.
We always read
I
what
was
we're
confused why you were tracking it.
Okay, so let me, before we go into in the staff report, we detailed the costs. We would not typically go into that extent of detail in the staff report, but I thought it would be useful to see exactly what it is that we're going to be spending money on to keep the project moving. I'll just go through the funding for this project, or how it works in terms of the budget, and then we can kind of come back to those costs if people have some specific questions. In a nutshell, the total amount here, we come over here to the proposed amendment, we've got 2 parts. So this is the Renewable Energy Reserve Fund. The total balance in this fund as of right now is $1 million. And that, the money was moved into that fund in the 2015-16 budget, is my recollection. So there's $1 million sitting in there. So what we propose to do is to expend $940,000, and the expenditures, detailed expenditures are detailed in the staff report. We expect when we transfer this to a new developer for them to assume some of those costs. And ultimately, we will pay, MCE will pay for those costs through the PPA and through the power purchase agreement, through the rate that we pay for electricity from this facility. But the reason you want to transfer some of these costs is because they're eligible for tax credits and accelerated depreciation. So the way this works is if you can imagine 100 of expenses and you get a 50% tax credit and accelerated depreciation all in. So you transfer 100 and then basically they sell it back to you for 75 because through the PPA rate, because they've taken those tax credits and accelerated depreciation. So for that reason, they'll take the expenses if we require it as part of the agreement, and then they'll just sell them back to us. So that's an explanation for where this revenue and other sources number is coming from.
And Stein would have done the same.
Well,
Yes.
see, we're only incurring these expenses because there's no developer in place.
Exactly.
And had there been Steinwell still in place, we wouldn't be
You
doing
would not
this.
have incurred these expenses.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
The reason why the revenues do not equal the expenditures is because some of these expenses we don't think, we've been advised, may not be eligible for the tax rebates. And there's no point in transferring expenses that they can't take advantage of because they'll just mark up, add their premium on top of it and sell it right back to us. That's why there's.
So the 761, that's coming, that reimbursement is anticipated based on the tax credits that the new candidate to replace Stein will appreciate?
That 761 is based on a check that the new developer would write to MCE and pay us
Okay.
for a bunch of invoices that we would return hand to them, and then they would submit to the government
And get
when
tax
they do, they
credits
get
for
tax
that.
credits for it.
Right, okay. So, but it's the advantageous tax treatment that gives you the confidence that amount will be reimbursed by the new contractual partner.
What gives me confidence is when we go to negotiate the agreement, I'm going to say, here's the PPA rate without me selling you these expenses. Now show me the PPA rate with me selling you these expenses, and then I can do a present value calculation of those, the difference of those values, and compare it to the 761. And if it saves us a bunch of money, which I anticipate it will, then we would transfer it. And if it doesn't, then we won't.
Question?
Yeah.
Carla Small. So basically, because they pulled, or it hasn't worked out, it's costing us $178,000, is that what you're saying? Because you just said we wouldn't be incurring these costs if they hadn't
Yeah.
pulled. So
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get
The
that
178.
clarification.
It's a really good question. What would have all of the expenses that we are incurring would have been incurred by a developer?
Right.
So some of those expenses they would have been able to write off, and some of those expenses they would not have probably been able to write off.
But would they have paid them?
They would have paid them, and guess who would have paid for them in the end? We would have. We're paying for everything, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in this project. And it's just a question of whether you pay it up front or you pay it through the rate that you are required to pay for the electricity.
And just what might be helpful as a reminder is that this is a project that we intend to own. As soon as it comes online, we will be buying the energy at a set price. That price will be dictated by what is the cost to build it. So if we're able to minimize the cost to build it, we would then have a lower price to pay.
I didn't have so much of a problem with that. I just wanted to clarify a statement you
It's a
made.
great question.
That I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Just a quick one, when Stein was unable to meet the commitments, didn't we also get a penalty from them for? or
No, we didn't.
Okay. No, I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, how has the timeline changed? When will the project be completed and when was it expected to be completed?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the timeline has been extended a bit, but it hasn't, I guess I'll back up a bit, that when we initially entered into the power purchase agreement to have this project built, the anticipated online date was December of 2016. That date was intentionally set because we were at that time anticipating the expiration of the ITC tax credits. That the ITC tax credits did not expire and actually have been extended. So that is no longer a problem. The other thing that occurred since we entered into this agreement a couple of years ago is that the PG&E interconnection timeline has been extended due to El Nino. PG&E has let us know that they will not be able to complete the interconnection on the final phase of this project until April 2017. So
What aspect of El Nino, what exactly?
The weather was so
they're
hard.
very busy. Yeah.
And not necessarily.
Yeah, so the point that I'm making is that because the online date is now extended to April 2017, we actually, the changes that are being made right now in the developer role are not pushing us beyond that April date. We were looking at an online date that would have had a project sitting around not generating energy for several months until PG&E had interconnected it. So we're not looking at a change yet at this point due to the developer role. The date extension is really due to the interconnection timeline. And we are negotiating to speed that up, so we may be successful in that.
Oh, do we think April when I'm sorry,
I don't think
do we think in April when PG&E finds the time that we'll be able to, that the project is then going to be online? Is that what's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay. And so all in, the delay, although not entirely our fault, is only December to April. And all in, the extra cost, the extra money that we're fronting but not really losing is $178,500. Okay, thank you.
Although you really won't know that until you enter into a new contract with a new developer.
That's
right.
You don't have a
That's right.
set price with the new developer.
Right.
That's part of what, follow-up question I have is you talked about how you had optimism in the process of selecting replacement. Is there a promising candidate that's live and online?
We have a few different parties that we're working with right now, and the intention is to bring together proposals from those different parties within the next 2 weeks. So I think once we have all the different proposals in hand, we'll be in a better position to assess which the best one is.
So hypothetically speaking, if that process were to be delayed beyond expectations, would the delay in hiring a new contractor, that would well impact when our ultimate completion date would be, wouldn't it?
Conceivably, yeah. I mean, if the process drags out, that
Right.
could delay things, and that's why we're trying to move forward as quickly as possible.
Right. And then the tax credit that originally was scheduled to sunset in December 16, does the new one have a sunset date?
That's a good question. It's not, I think that there is a sunset on that one as well, but it's a few years out, so it's not really relevant so much to this project.
Just, it's curious, I'm a lawyer, so open-ended stuff makes me nervous.
Yeah, I think they extended it by 3 years, is that
I
right?
think
All
it
right.
was 3 years, too, but we all
Yeah.
can be on it.
And just one other thing that I think might be useful as far as pinning things down. We have several developers and finance partners that are interested in playing a role in this project. We've received 2 term sheets so far and some indicative pricing. We have requested that all offers come in by 10 a.m. on May 31st. And at that time, we'll be reviewing the bids and kind of doing an apples-to-apples comparison. And then the earliest that we would be bringing a new partner before your board for approval would be the June meeting. But that's the timeline that we're working with right now, and our goal is to find a developer that's able to meet or potentially exceed the terms of the original PPA as far as the purchase price for the energy.
Thank you. Yeah, did Scion start any of the installations? I mean, did they leave the site a mess? What type of, what's the status of the project on the ground?
Yeah, I was just out there earlier this week, and there's been really no work whatsoever done on the site. So it's pretty much just
The way it was the day the ribbon was cut.
the way, yeah, that's right.
And then who is being contracted to spend this $1 million, $940,000? Who is doing that?
So there's a few different, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me just pull it up. So there's the short answer to that question is that we have, with the exception of the PGE agreement, there's nothing resembling a contractual agreement put in place yet. So with regard to the fencing, we're looking at some different parties to do that work. Same thing with regard to the site grading. We have a proposal for someone to take over the construction management. It's a firm I think I can name called Synergy, and we're very happy, and they have a very good reputation in the field. So we're happy with that. And then the brick building permit fees, I believe, are due to the fine city of Richmond.
And so we have, as a result of Scion dropping out, this expenditure of this 940 is increasing our staff time invested, correct?
Yeah, you don't want to have this happen if you can avoid it. But I think that having met with Scion, I think that the step is really positive for MCE. So I'm glad we're moving forward with contracting with a new party, and we've met with several developers so far. They seem confident, professional, intelligent, and that's a real improvement over now.
So why are they getting off the hook free?
I guess that's where my line of questioning is. They could have left the site messy. They definitely have increased our cost. I'm not calling the 178 a cost, although I do agree with Bob that we won't know it's a cost until we get the new PPA.
Yeah.
But they breached the contract, right? I'm assuming that they breached the contract.
Yeah, by their own, they have stated that they have spent approximately $1 million on the pre-work of this project. They did a lot of engineering work. They did surveying. They were very involved in preparing informational documents that we relied upon for the reviews, the environmental reviews that we went through. They spent a lot of time working, developing agreements with the finance company, and so there was legal time, technical time, project management time, and we were. I think that the fact that they did not ask us to buy out the project and reimburse them for their expenses is noteworthy. In some cases when this happens, the developer that is being terminated will hold the assets, the interconnection agreement, for example, any permits that have been pulled already, and not turn them over, forcing us to start from scratch. Fortunately, that outcome did not occur, and as a result, we have retained the assets in their current form, and that does help us not have to go back to square one. There's been a lot of progress on the site as far as the permitting goes, the environmental review, and that's exciting. So it's not a step back in that area, and we're pleased that we now have ownership of the assets and can transition them to a developer that has the ability to do an effective job.
So we got their work product.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Okay, Ray and then Alan.
Ray with East Sausalito. David, sort of two questions. Could you remind us, perhaps without going into gory details, what the Renewable Energy Reserve Fund that we set up actually was set up for? Okay, and we've just stripped it. So, you know, is that a problem? I mean, why did we put $1 million away for this? And by the way, where does it sit on our financial
Yeah,
statements?
I can speak to that,
Okay.
because David wasn't
Right.
here at the
Yeah,
time,
of
but,
course.
it occurred during a time when we had extra revenue flowing into our budget, and we were wanting to have the ability to enter into renewable agreement that might come our way during the course of the year, a unique fleeting opportunity, as we sometimes call them. So it was really a kind of an open-ended budget category that we thought could be used for a local project, but also could be used for a renewable project opportunity in Solano County or even in the Central Valley. And we wanted to have the ability to move quickly if we came across an opportunity like that. So that was one of the things that was contemplated. But at that time, there wasn't any discussion about a specific use of the money. And I think it was great that the board had that foresight to create a reserve for an opportunity that came along, because this seems to be a very good fit for it.
Yes, but it's now zero.
But it's going to be restored as soon as we find a new development.
But we don't know whether fully it's going to be restored. Okay. And so a sort of related question is, so this has never been contemplated to be part of the actual base reserve that we're accumulating.
Let me answer, I can answer that. if you
Or
want
not.
more. Yeah. So let me make two comments. I went back to the staff report where the Renewable Energy Reserve Fund was created, and then I quoted from it in this staff report. So it says the procurement or the use of the fund is for the procurement or development of renewable energy not planned for in the operating fund. So that's the purpose of the fund. And I think we're using it in a manner that's consistent with that. The way that we account, an MCE accounts for things from a budgeting perspective, is to break the total into different funds. So we have our operating fund, we have our renewable energy reserve fund, we have our energy efficiency fund, and we have a local energy renewable development fund, something like that. Those funds are basically internally imposed restrictions on the use of funds. They're not, just for clarification, recognized by the GASB, Government Accounting Standards Board. So when you see our audited financial statements, they're very particular about what you can restrict in the net position section, and they don't allow internal restrictions. So these funds exist strictly from a budgeting perspective and not from a financial accounting perspective. And so I think your question was, where is it in our net position? And the answer is it's just part of the net position.
So just looking at the financial statement then, you would have thought that that $1 million was included in our reserves. And now it's $1 million less.
Well, we're going to, in our reserves, we have, our balance sheet is composed of assets, liabilities, and net position. So
No, I understand. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And when we go to record the revenues and expenditures that we're proposing tonight, it's going to appear on what we thought of as the income statement.
Although, David, most of these are going to be capital expenditures, are they not? They'll be capitalized on the balance sheet, so it doesn't reduce our net position. It just transfers it from cash to capitalized assets.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, but the hope is, the expectation is we're not even getting, you're right. We're not going to get that far. We're going to get that far. Right. That's a good point.
My follow-on question was going to be then, is there, stuff happens. We know. That's why we have foresight to put money away. Is there anything that staff management has learned that says that we should change our diligence process in picking developers?
I can say a little bit about that. When we had the opportunity to engage on development at this project with Chevron, we had a very short timeline to act on, given the expected expiration of the ITC. And we put the project out to bid, and we received a very limited response. There were only 2 qualifying bids, and there was a very big price difference. The lowest bidder also had a U.S. panel manufacturing facility that was seen as very favorable to staff and our board, of course. And the price difference was a very big factor in the decision-making as well. The next highest bidder was quite a bit higher and would have made the project a much more of an expense for MCE, and may have limited our ability to do other local development projects for a period of time. So those were some of the constraints that we were operating under. I think if we had had more time, it would have been wise to go back out to the market with another RFP, trying to get more interest, and certainly due diligence and thorough outreach to bidders is part of our common practice. So I think that it was a bit unavoidable given the circumstances, but I do think that our current practices are set up to avoid that type of situation in most cases.
Alan, do you remember your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Actually, and I thought of another one.
Okay, fine.
So what is your confidence level of the work product that Stion is going to be transferring to us is actually usable with minimal to no revisions from a new developer?
Well, we are actually revising their documents, and the engineering work that they've done is going to be improved upon by the new developer. And that's part of what we'll be looking for in the applications that come to us on May 31st is what types of adjustments are being proposed. To give you an example, we think that the panels being used at the site can be a more efficient version of what Stion was proposing, and as a result will be generating more energy per square foot. And so we will be taking a very close look at the engineering documents that they provided and doing some adjustments before we apply for permits. And that's part of why these expenses, why we're bringing them before your board tonight, because we don't want to wait until June to apply for permits, and we don't want to apply for permits using the old version of the design. We want to be able to adjust that.
And if I can jump in on your question, when you say we, that's our staff internally that's doing that?
Our staff with external support, and as David mentioned, we're working with Synergy on that.
So I guess the next question is, now I forgot the question. See
I'm sorry.
see what
That
happened?
was my doing.
No,
Sorry.
it probably went out anyway. If I think of it again, I'll
All right, somebody
pop up.
think of a question so Alan has time to remember.
Thank you.
Tom Budd, Richmond. I just want to point out from a construction standpoint that this is a far less risky and much more attractive project for potential developers now. The entitlements are in hand, the agreement with PG&E is in hand, and so somebody taking this on really has much less risk and much fewer questions about the feasibility of it than somebody would have back last year when Stion took it on.
A very good point.
So, to the extent that there's going to be additional work done to review all this by either internal, external, or new developer, there's cost there. That, is there any retribution or anything we can go back to Stion for, or we're done? That's one question. The other one is, so how have we gone out to solicit new potential developers, and where are we in the numbers of responses so far, knowing that May 31st is still a ways away?
Yeah. So at this time, we have between 4 and 5 candidates that will likely be bidding and providing term sheets. We've already received 2 of those term sheets. We're expecting possibly 3 more.
So the numbers are even better than the first time.
Yes, they
Okay.
are better. And you're right that this is resulting in a lot of staff time. But I think there's a side benefit there, because one of the goals that we had in working on this project was to develop some in-house capacity and a lot of hands-on knowledge with the local development process. We're actually in the final stages of recruitment to fill a second contracts manager position that will be working on local development projects, and will add some support in this area. Fortunately, Greg Brem, our Director of Power Resources, has a lot of local development experience, so he's been very helpful in navigating us through the next steps. Unfortunately, it has taken up a lot of his time, but I think that it's been a good experience for the staff team to be involved in, because we kind of know what pitfalls to watch out for, and what things we should be doing in advance, next time around. So those are some benefits. To answer your first question, though, we do not have any plans to go back to Stion at this point. I think that because we did not need to pay them for any of the investments that they made, I don't think there's a need for us to take it any further than that. We are ending up in a much better position today than we were before we ever got started on this project. As Director Butt was saying, we have the entitlements in place. We've completed the environmental review process. The PG&E interconnection is in place, and that's no small feat. So a lot of work has been done, and I think that finding a developer to kind of take it through to home plate is going to be, by contrast, should be an easier task than the first phase of the project.
Just one question, something I think you mentioned was that you wanted to get the building permits now, but you also mentioned, maybe I misheard you, that the new developer would have to redo some of the engineering. So if we don't have the new developer online, why would we get, we need the new engineering designs to get the building permits.
Yeah, the engineering work will be done by the project developer, or the project manager, I'm sorry.
So that's separate from the project developer?
Right, so it's the construction management line item that you see here. That's the role we're talking about with Synergy, for them to take that on. They're already reworking the design, and once we finalize the agreement with them, we'll be using that design for any of the bids that developers submit to us on the 31st.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions from the board? Any comments from the public? Right, so David, did you have more?
Sure, I just wanted to clarify that there's 2 points, or just emphasize that there's 2 parts to the recommendation. One is to provide budget authorization, and that's the recommendation A. And then recommendation B is the authorization of the CEO and the board chair to make payments and enter into contracts in an amount not to exceed the amount that is being approved under budget.
Thank you. Would someone like to move?
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposition? That's approved. Thank you, everybody. I think we're in a better place than we were before. All right, so now we're on to board member and staff matters. Bob, did you have something you want to talk about with board members? Any board issues? I thought,
We have one staff matter, but we should take the board matter first.
Which is what, the audit committee, or?
No?
Yes, if you
That's
haven't
you.
mentioned it already, now's a good time.
What do you think I'm reporting?
Audit committee, sounds great.
That's what she said you were.
So serious.
That's what she said you were going to report on earlier, by the way.
Very briefly, the audit committee met with the partner, met with the audit partner. Since the committee is new, we spent most of this was just a preliminary meeting before they started the audit. Since this is the first time that we've had an audit committee, we spent most of the meeting asking simply questions about the audit firm's history with MCA, what other utility companies do they audit, and also a number of questions, just general questions about their prior audits and what they saw as financial risk of Marin Clean Energy, what are the issues they've raised in prior years, what areas do they plan to look at more carefully this year, to what extent do they audit the work level, a number of issues that we got answers to some, but many of them will be answered toward the end of the audit. So at the end of the meeting, the committee concluded to accept the proposal for auditing our financial statements for the year ended March 31st. And the committee will have a much longer meeting with the auditors when they complete the audit, and we'll get a full report. And at that point, we'll report back to the board.
Okay, great, thank you.
And we have one item under staff matters, and
I was
Beth
hoping
Kelly,
this would
our
be a
legal
regulatory
director,
update.
is.
I'm sorry to disappoint. I don't actually have a regulatory update today. But anytime you'd like me to come back, I'm happy to do that. So we have a new staff member that I just wanted to introduce you to. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Emily Fisher. Emily joined actually today. And she's our new legal counsel. So Emily has over a decade in public government and public interest experience. Most recently, she was in the public law group of Myers Nabe. And before that, she was at CSD, the California Department of Community Services and Development, where she was the Public Records Act officer, the Form 700 officer, the privacy officer, and the fair hearings officer. And so we are thrilled to have Emily's skill set in-house here. We're thrilled to have her join us. So with that, welcome, Emily.
It's way more
Yeah,
exciting
Emily.
to see you here in person than to watch you on the internet. Thank you.
Great. And congratulations, Beth, to the expansion of your department.
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Any other board and staff matters?